Have you ever considered that a family tree might be used to trace diseases and patterns of inheritance from generation to generation? This lesson is on pedigrees, which illustrates family histories and shows how a trait is inherited over several generations. In the simplest pedigree, the trait's considered either present or absent with the expression of the disease. The first step to working out a pedigree is to make sure if the trait is autosomal or if it's sex linked. So that would be on the sex chromosomes. The second step is to identify the pattern of expression. Is it dominant or recessive? For recessive alleles, that expression might skip several generations. So, sex specific patterns can be due to linkage on the X chromosome or the Y chromosome. And in humans, two X chromosomes produce a female, while XY chromosomes produce a male. So, if the trait is Y linked, any individual who expresses the trait also has to be male. So, if only males express the trait, the gene is on the Y chromosome. But if mostly males, like at a rate of like 5 to 1 or 6 to 1, the trait could be recessive, but on the X chromosome because there's a bias for sons to inherit that disease, but females can be affected. And we're going to go through four basic types of pedigrees: the autosomal dominant and autosomal recessive. That would be not sex linked, and then Y linked and X linked recessive. So there's basic pedigree symbols. Females are circles and squares are males. A horizontal line connecting a male and a female depicts a mating relationship. And when you're drawing a pedigree, certain conventions are followed to depict offspring and their characteristics. So, a downward line from a mating relationship would demonstrate any children, and that's next generation. And a solid black symbol in the square or circle indicates the expression of the trait in question. So, in the pedigree above, only the male experienced that trait. So when we look at Marfan syndrome, this is expressed in both sexes roughly equally. So there are 4 females affected and 3 males affected. Therefore, we're going to assume it's autosomal. Also, because it is expressed in every generation, we're going to assume that it is dominant. What we can do to determine the genotype is then assign the code M for the recessive allele, lowercase m, and everybody who is unaffected has the 2 lowercase m's. Then anybody who is affected, we give them at least one dominant M trait. So all of those affected individuals have at least one dominant trait. Then there's probabilities to be heterozygote or homozygote dominant for Marfan syndrome. If they're homozygous dominant, all the offspring from a normal mate should be affected. So therefore, both individuals 1 and individual 2 must be heterozygotes because they have normal children. If they had 2 dominant alleles, they would have to pass on the dominant allele and all of their children would be affected. So we know those 2 individuals are heterozygotes, and then because they also have one normal parent, we can assume that these offspring also all have at least one recessive allele because they would have gotten them from their homozygous recessive parents. So now looking at albinism, again, it appears in both sexes relatively equally in this pedigree. So we have 2 females, and 3 males affected. However, it is not expressed in every generation. Therefore, we can assume that it is an autosomal recessive trait because it skips generations. So if we want to give now the genotypes for the individuals, we know that all of our affected individuals are going to be homozygous recessive for the trait and have 2 recessive alleles. Next, we're going to work upwards to the parents of affected individuals. And both of them, because this is a homozygous recessive trait, must carry 1 recessive allele. So we know that this individual also carries a recessive allele, and this individual also carries a recessive allele. Okay. So we know that they must be heterozygous because they have affected children. Okay. As well, and I'm just going to put in those lowercase a's here. Everybody else who is unaffected must have a dominant allele because they are unaffected. Now, if individuals do not have children, like these two individuals, we don't know if they have one recessive allele or if they're homozygous dominant because we can't see that in their pedigree. So again, here we're just saying that these individuals, 2 has to have a individual 2 here. We don't actually know what they have because all of their children are unaffected. And again, we don't know what these 2 individuals have because they don't have any children. However, we know that individual 1 has to have at least one recessive allele because they have children who are affected. So we can fill in the full genotype for their offspring. So now looking at a sex-linked trait, we're going to look at hairy ears. And we can see this as a sex-linked trait because only males express this trait and not a single female in this pedigree expresses this disorder. Moreover, all sons of an affected father have this trait. So we can go through and we can give a genotype to all of the females as there's no hairy ears trait because females don't have a Y chromosome and they can't carry it. Okay. All males can be given the XY chromosome because they have a Y, which makes them male. And then affected males have a uppercase H, indicating that they have hairy ears. And unaffected males, we just coded here a plus sign, indicated the fact that it is a normal allele coding for non-hairy ears. So looking at this pedigree for hemophilia, we see that only males are affected, but because some sons here are normal, that we know must be an X-linked condition because not all sons are affected. Hemophilia has skipped generations. There's nobody in this F1 generation that has hemophilia. Therefore, it's going to be a recessive trait. So because all of the females are, we give all the females X chromosomes to identify their sex chromosomes. We give all the males XY to identify their chromosomes as well. Now we're going to assign alleles for hemophilia. So we know the affected male here has a uppercase H because they're affected. And because this individual here is not affected, we know that individual 1 must have been a carrier, and she passed on her affected X chromosome to 2 of her sons. Okay. So all the daughters of an affected father are also going to receive that gene for hemophilia because the father only has one X chromosome to pass on to his daughter. So all of his daughters would be a carrier for hemophilia. Now, this is the same if you're the daughter of a man who has color blindness, as you will be the carrier of the color blindness trait because he only has one X chromosome to pass on to his offspring. And he cannot pass on hemophilia to his sons because hemophilia is not carried on the Y chromosome. So now we're assuming that the sons who do not have hemophilia all have a normal X chromosome. Females who are unaffected from an affected father have one hemophilia chromosome and one normal chromosome. And for these unaffected females, we don't know if they got one of their mother's affected chromosomes or her unaffected chromosomes, but they would have got their normal chromosome from their father because he is unaffected. Okay. So lastly, with hemophilia and other sex-linked recessive disorders, typically only males are affected, but we will see females who are affected if they come from a carrier mother and an affected father. It's not Y-linked because a father does not pass it on to his sons, and because we skip generations, that disorder is going to be recessive. So again, pedigrees are a really easy way to problem solve the genotypes of different individuals based on what their parents have, what their siblings have, and what their children have between different disorders, whether it's all females, all males, um, or if it is skips a generation or appears in every generation, or if affected children can come from unaffected parents. So I hope you enjoy. Take care. Bye.